Well, our next speaker is Mark, who's one of the startups here at the ODI, using open data for resilience against climate change, specifically in the context of cities.
Absolutely, yes. So welcome everybody. Thank you for staying on to this point in the evening. I've been based here for 8 months, and I'm running, essentially, it's a consulting company that advises cities on how to use open data and good communications practice to reduce risk and damage, specifically from climate change impacts. What I'm going to do is I am going to sort of share a few kind of points of concerns about whether actually smartification of cities might be creating and generating risk. But before I do, I thought I'd just explain, how did I come to be working on cities. I've got a background as a humanitarian, actually, and my story in terms of getting into the city space begins actually with I actually got a text about the Japan earthquake and tsunami, which happened 4 years ago, while I was working in Haiti. In Haiti, I was actually running a daily radio program called Information You Need to Have for the urban population of Haiti. I got this text, and clearly there'd been an earthquake and a tsunami, but not just that. It had hit the city of Sendai, where I'd lived 30 years before, and I'd been a young school teacher there, and I taught all up and down the coast where the tsunami struck. And I was most anxious to find out what had happened to my Japanese family, with whom I was still in touch. Went on to Google Person Finder that was set up within a couple of days, just as it was yesterday for the Nepal earthquake. Couldn't find them there. Eventually they registered on Facebook about 3 days later, so I was very relieved. By the way, Google Person Finder was set up in Mountain View, California by a guy called Ken Kawai, who is from Sendai, who was actually looking for his grandmother, and she was registered on Google Person Finder. So that's a great example of kind of tech self-help. In Haiti, we were hosting Ushahidi. I don't know whether there are any crisis mappers here in the room. Ushahidi are the people that kind of blaze the trail in crisis mapping, putting incidents in crisis zones up on maps. And they were saying at the time, we have a local chapter in Japan who is mobilizing, who actually produced the platform on the left-hand side. Now, after I think things had died down, I started to think, actually, away from all of the drama of Fukushima, I wonder what happened to information flows and how data was used in the most digitally enabled and arguably technically sophisticated society in the world. So after Haiti, I went to Japan and I led a study on what actually happened in terms of the use of data and communication. And what I was really interested in was the link between the responder here in the city of Sendai and that map. And I was shocked to discover there was absolutely no link. That actually the community, and they were Japanese, some of them were local, who'd put all of that information up on the map, actually had no impact on the work of the responder, because there was actually no collaboration and no pre-agreed protocols for data sharing, particularly in terms of crowdsourced data. Worse than that, a lot of the international responders asked the Japanese government to make available its data, because they were actually moving into the zone and wanted to know not just what the damage was, but what the demographics were. The Japanese government wouldn't release any data, and when it finally did, none of it was disaggregated and none of it was machine readable. The third thing I discovered was that we all heard about the collision of infrastructure around the nuclear facility. In other words, water hit a nuclear reactor. What we didn't hear about was the fact that the tsunami knocked the telecommunications infrastructure out along a huge swathe of the coastline. And what that actually caused was a kind of a reversion to an analog or even a pre-analog era of communications, in which the only way survivors could get information was by donating petrol to a local radio station. This was in Ishinomaki, which was right at in the most affected town. Donating their precious petrol, which powered a generator, which powered an FM station. The local Ishinomaki newspaper was actually a handwritten affair that was handed out. So there was a huge desperation for information, but there was a technological reversion. So I started to think, this kind of looks like a future kind of cities disaster, and I think there may be more of these. And even if a tsunami seems unique, and even if a nuclear crisis seems unique, nevertheless, this collision of infrastructure and this poor use of data surely points to a bigger need. So I started to look at cities, and we heard the figures, I think, from Gavin and Gaia. Half the world lives in cities now. Actually, 100 years ago, only 10% lived in cities. By 2050, it'll be 75%. Currently, 80% of our GDP and our assets are located in cities. I think the other issue is that climate change generates universal risk. It's very interesting that after the floods in 2013-14 in Somerset and across parts of the UK, the world's community of risk experts chose to gather in London to discuss risk. Right? And if we look at one specific driver of damage, flooding, urban flooding is the biggest single financial cost of disasters worldwide, and it is estimated to cost the global economy $1 trillion by 2050. So that's a huge risk. It's a cost, but it's also an opportunity. So I was absolutely convinced that there was a role for an organisation to start to work in this space. What has Resurgence actually been doing, though, in the last few months? Well, I've got to admit, I'm a bit of a policy wonk. So one of the things I've been working on is the policy around city resilience and disaster risk reduction. So I've been involved with a group of urban experts in writing open data and open source policies into this cities charter that is called the 10 Essentials that 2,500 cities have signed up to, including a number of UK cities at mayoral level. This was actually launched at the big World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, again in Sendai last month, that some of you may have heard of. And what I've been keen to do is to weave into every one of these 10 essentials. The first is organised for disaster resilience. Others are increased infrastructural resilience, strengthen financial capacity for resilience, ensure effective disaster response. We're hearing a lot about how the outside digital volunteer community is mobilising around Nepal at the moment. The question is, actually, is this happening internally? Is there internal capacity as well? And particularly in the area that I'm interested in around using data and communication. But these 10 are, as it were, embedded like perhaps a stick of Brighton rock with the principles of open data and open source. Why is open source important as a principle? Well, actually, if a community is locked into proprietary software and actually it has a major shock, then it's going to recover less quickly. It's actually far better that it has local tech developer capacity, and that it can build on open source platforms so that it's not locked into expensive arrangements with multinational tech companies. I'm not at all corporately hostile, by the way. Nor is it, I can assure you I'm not, nor is it actually, it's not actually a resilient strategy to be dependent on external experts. So building a local, open source based tech capacity locally is a key is a key part of a resilience strategy in any city or in any community. The other thing I've been working on is looking at the plethora of resilience-related tech applications. And there are lots of them. And there are about 100, 150 that have appeared in the last 2 years out of hackathons, some organised by DEFRA, some organised by the World Bank, some organised by the UN, some in partnership with Esri and other large tech companies. Some of them you'll have heard of. You may know of flood alerts. Wonderful application that really allows you to get into your phone updates on whether the area you're in is likely to be flooded. The actual producers of that also have a product called Gauge Map, which allows you to connect through Twitter to your local river gauge. Cities are built around rivers, of course. That's where they developed. And again, river flooding, huge driver of cost. This is actually an application for identifying, first of all, finding and then maintaining water culverts in cities. Water culverts are kind of hidden streams or hidden water courses. They often go under roads or railway tracks. And of course, when you have floods and if they're blocked, you have that collision again of water with transport infrastructure, which is paralysing. So what have I discovered in terms of challenges in this area? Well, the first one is that even though the UK is a trailblazer, a relative trailblazer at city level in terms of using open data, at the end of the day, capability globally is very low. And even in the UK, if you start speaking to a city about open data, before you know it, you've got to talk about a whole set of other issues around leadership, data governance, data privacy, data protection, a whole set of very valid issues. And it's a complex area, and it's very clear to me that we're just in the opening phase of unleashing the potential for open data within a wider data governance and management strategy. The second thing is that those resilience apps, those 100 or so promising applications, well, a lot of them are just sitting on the shelves. They're not going anywhere because perhaps in part they haven't been embedded within the right incubator. They haven't been inserted within the kind of, I think, admirable corporate crucible that you've established down at Canary Wharf, where you bring together the key actors. You bring together City Hall, you bring together utility companies perhaps in this space, you bring together investors, and you bring together people that understand business models. That's not happening in the disaster and resilience and risk reduction space sufficiently. I'd also add that I think that there is a huge amount of attention going into mitigation of carbon emissions and not enough into the mitigation of risk driven by the impacts of climate change that are already happening. The last thing is actually the technology has really advanced on risk identification. Satellite imagery, digital elevation models, the granularity, the resolution has improved. The modeling itself through computational power is amazing. What's languishing far behind is public risk communication and how to link the kind of behavioral change stuff that Susan mentioned, the nudge stuff, with actual risk information so that people actually change their behavior, which might mean that they get flood insurance, or it might mean that actually they evacuate from a building, because actually what stops people from evacuating from buildings in cities? Well, the American Red Cross discovered after Hurricane Sandy, that one of the big brakes or constraints on people leaving buildings was they didn't want to leave their pets, or they didn't want to take their pets either because they didn't know where they were going, and they were really concerned about their pets. So actually, communication strategies that start with pets, for instance, have you thought about your pet, if your home got flooded, where actually what would you do for your pet, right? Starts the whole family thinking not just about the pet, but about their own contingency plans, right? This is obvious stuff, but the risk communication sector is in its relative infancy compared with other sectors such as the health communication sector. The other challenge in cities is you've got an information ecosystem. You've got local media, national media, you've got social media, and you've got complex demographics. So where I'm from in Tooting, 5 years ago, my neighbours were all Tamil Sri Lankans. A lot of them have moved out, and they've been replaced by Poles. And the demographics different. The Poles are much younger than the Tamil Sri Lankans. The London Resilience Forum is trying to work out how to reach people with flooding information, because up to 600,000 homes in London are at risk from flooding. This is a tool that I've developed which helps a city map in terms of an ecosystem. It's the way information flows and the way that information has influence and is acted upon. And it really is in acknowledgement that actually it's a tricky, complex environment, a city, in terms of not just data, but actually information flows and the way that city dwellers respond to it. Coming back to the skepticism bit about smart cities, it seems to me that actually if you're going to wire up a city and if you're going to take advantage of the linkage between infrastructure for efficiency, then you're creating another level of risk. So actually you're creating what's known as cascading risk. If one system goes down and another system is dependent on it, then there's a knock-on effect. So actually smartification, unless it's done very carefully, could increase risk in cities. The other issue is, of course, the cybersecurity one. And I heard about this first of all actually from Médecins Sans Frontières, who were worried about ISIS hacking into their cold medicine storage chain in the Middle East, because they said, we've got these sensors, we have to have these, we've decided we need these sensors on our fridges, which are all over the warehouses in the Middle East, but actually, what if they hack into our system? What if ISIS hacks into our system? It seems to me that this has to be a big concern for city systems as well, and that this is perhaps where MSF is ahead in some of its thinking than some of our smart city planners are. And then the last thing is, there's an argument that we're over-dependent on technology, and that there are not enough of us with grey hairs who remember, for instance, not having a mobile phone and the protocols you'd have in agreements to meet with someone, in a specific place. So when these systems go down, we need, I think, better preparedness to cope without them. That's the first thing. And that if we think technology can actually solve everything, we've got another risk, which is that we lose kind of, whether you call it common sense or situational awareness, I'm not sure. But one of the things that came out in the Japan report I led was that the Japanese prided themselves after the Kobe earthquake in creating this incredibly advanced early warning system. As soon as an earthquake would go off, the Shinkansen would stop, the bullet train would stop, all the lifts would stop. If you were watching television, the broadcast would be interrupted. And they thought, this will tell us everything. Well, actually, a number of people were killed by the tsunami because they over-relied on the public warnings, which themselves were out of date because the system was knocked offline because the grid went down. And actually, they didn't look around enough and realize that there was a bigger wave coming. They didn't really use situational awareness enough. So I'm really saying that actually we may be losing something that we had before, some kind of more sense of just using our senses and our situational awareness as we spend more and more time embedded in our iPhone screens. So that's it. These are the partners on the left-hand side for the Open Data for City Resilience. Some of them are partners. I'd like them all to become clients of mine. On the left-hand side, the open data stuff. On the right-hand side, the communication for resilience work. If you're interested in what I'm trying to do, please become a partner. Yes.